Everybody to our July 7th edition of the Wednesday class that shall not be named. We had a week or two off there as I was out of town.
We lost the sound.
We lost the rabbi.
Yeah.
That's probably why the sound just.
We lost the rabbi, didn't we? What happened to Rabbi Haas? He disappeared.
I'm sure he'll be like General MacArthur.
He will return.
He will return. I knew you'd get it.
There he is. We got you back.
Welcome to the Wednesday morning class that shall not be named. Sorry about that. I got knocked off for a second. We're here to study again. I hope everybody is doing well. We got people in New Jersey, in South Carolina, and in Georgia, and in Illinois, I believe. So we have people from 4 states celebrating here. And of course, tonight we have a very special event as we're going to have our Women of Valor. And even if you can't attend, please make sure to congratulate Malvina, who of course is in your area in South Carolina. No one more deserving. So we're honoring her, Malvina Leader, and Solomon, and of course, Teresa Victor. So
Yeah, we'll
very worthy
make it.
women.
We'll open. Okay.
So welcome everybody. We will have class for the next couple of weeks, just to let you know. For today, we hadn't decided on a topic, so I was thinking about holidays and realized there's only one more holiday really for the summer. And so even though it's not for a couple months, I thought we'd talk about Tisha B'Av, which is kind of a holiday that some people know about, some people don't. But it is the last pretty much holiday on the calendar before Rosh Hashanah. And so we're going to talk a little bit about it and its history. And I'll let everybody get settled and welcome. We got welcome to Genevieve and Larry and Jane and Michael and Lou and Arnold and Arlene and Ron and Flossie. Michael, are you in town right now? You're in town, aren't you?
I am in town for
Okay,
this week and next week.
All right. And then where are you going?
Massachusetts.
Back out to Massachusetts. All right.
For a couple of weeks. Yeah.
All right. So let's go over Tisha B'Av. How many of us have heard of Tisha B'Av? And how many of us have celebrated? How many of us realize it is a very controversial holiday in the Reform movement? A little bit in the others, but very controversial for many reasons. So we'll start off by just talking about what is Tisha B'Av. And it's not Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av is a lesser known holiday. That is a Sadie Hawkins dance, kind of a St. Valentine's Day for Jews. But they're both in Av. So Tisha B'Av just is like July 4th. It is the 9th of Av. Tisha is 9, Ba is of, Av is a month. So it's the 9th of Av. And it comes in July or August. And it is a very interesting holiday because of one major fact, well, many major facts. It's because it is a fast day. So it is only the second of 2 fast days we have on the calendar. The first, of course, everybody knows is Yom Kippur. We have 5 other fast days that are partial fast days. You only fast during daylight hours, so you can drink and eat at night, like Ramadan. But the 9th of Av is a full fast day, which is really complicated because the only other full fast day is Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is a major holiday in the Bible, whereas Tisha B'Av is not. It is a post-biblical holiday, although we've been celebrating it a long time. So if it's a post-biblical holiday, even if it's a post-Torah holiday, it is not a major holiday. And a major holiday means you're not supposed to work. So the holidays you don't work, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Passover, Shavuos, and then you can add the Sabbath. So 6 days, Sabbath, of course, every week you don't. Tisha B'Av, though, is a full fast day. That means you fast for 25 hours, no water or no food, obviously, unless you're pregnant, young, or have some health issues. But it's not a major holiday. That means you still can work, although it's preface that if you don't have to work, you don't, but obviously if you need to work, you do. So it's a full fast day. So it seems like it is a major holiday, but it's not. It's in the summer, so obviously it's not as well known. And I think Ron has a question.
Yeah, Rabbi, why did you mention 25 hours?
Basically, for fast days, you fast an extra amount to make sure you get the full fast in. And also you wait, just like on the Sabbath, until the sun goes down and you see 3 stars, generally 25 hours.
Oh.
You probably start also a little early just to make sure. So that way you're ensured that you don't miss any, not even a second of the fast day. You do it all the way through. So that's just so, even though it's 24 hours a day, really the fast days are 25 hours actually. So that was a good question, Ron. So I should have made that more clear. So it's a 25-hour fast day, and that's Yom Kippur as well. It's in July or August, which is, a really hot time to fast, especially if you're in the South. But it's a work day as well. So you can be working, and if you keep Tisha B'Av, but you have to work, you're working all day, and yet you are fasting. So very difficult. And during this holiday, you have to understand the theme of the holiday is basically tragedy. It is the most mournful of all holidays, probably even more than Yom Kippur. And why is that? Because basically what Tisha B'Av is let's put all the tragedies that happened to Judaism on one day and we'll mourn all day. And that's what we do on Tisha B'Av. We mourn tragedies. Now, what are the major ones that are talked about? The first one is the 12 spies. It's when they came back and 10 of the spies said, the promised land is filled with giants, you can't go there. That's the second one is the destruction of the first temple, the destruction of the second temple, the Bar Kokhba revolution when it is basically destroyed or crushed and 500,000 or more Jews were killed. And then the next one is a few years later, or maybe even the next year, when the Jews are basically not allowed to go into Jerusalem anymore. So those are the 5 major calamities we talk about, but there are more. It's basically putting everything on that day. The Crusades, the expulsion from England, Spain, and France, World War I's beginning, the decision for the final solution during World War II, the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto. So basically, you put a lot of terrible things on this day, but this day above all else stresses the first destruction and the second destruction of the temple. That is the main thrust of this holiday, remembering the destruction. And that's something we're going to talk about, which is controversial in the Reform movement.
Do you think all this stuff really happened on the same day, or they're just honoring it all on the same day?
I believe they're all honoring on the same day. Certainly a couple were definitely in the same area of time. But yeah, it's basically now traditionally they will say they all happen on the same day. They probably didn't happen exactly on the same day, but in generally the same time period. And that's a good question. So if you look at the accounts from the Talmud, they'll say everything happened up to this point on these days. Others would say not. What are you not allowed to do? You don't eat or drink. You're not supposed to bathe or wash. You're not supposed to wear leather shoes, and you're not supposed to have sex with your spouse or anybody else for that matter. And so that one I just added. Because it is no marital sexual relations. However, I am sure they assume and explain that is a typo. It means all. Yes, Flossie.
Why no bathing?
because you're in mourning, so you're not supposed to care what you look like. It's kind of like if you're in mourning for losing someone who died. You're not supposed to really check and care about what you look like. And you're
Did
not
we
supposed to.
cover the mirrors?
Exactly, except for when you're in mourning for someone who died, obviously you have to bathe because the mourning process is a very long time. But for the fast day, you don't bathe, wash your hands, you don't worry about what you look like. If you're supposed to go to services, you sit on a low stool, kind of like if you just lost a loved one. You don't wear wet leather, which is the same thing for Yom Kippur, because leather is considered, obviously, at the time, probably an item for wealthy people. So you don't want to show off your wealth. There are other thoughts on to why we don't wear leather. You wouldn't wear a leather belt. This is if you keep it traditionally. You read from the book of Lamentations. Lamentations is the book it's basically the city of Jerusalem talking about its destruction during the first temple destruction. So it's a book connected to Jeremiah, which you also can read parts of Jeremiah. So you read from the Lamentations, you can read from Job, you read from Jeremiah. You can read from certain areas of the Talmud that discuss these things. You're not supposed to study Torah, though, unless it's really depressing parts. Like you only study Torah if it's a depressing part. Is Talmud the same? Or some would say you only study sections you're not familiar with, so you have some discombobulation because it's a new section that you're not used to. But basically, the Book of Lamentations is the main one. That's what it's connected to it. You read these poems from the Bible, and you can read some of them you can read from outside the Bible. They're called Kinot. They're specific sections of the Bible that you read during this, and they're basically like depressing poems. They're from the Bible, but there are other ones that come later that you can use as well. So there's like 50 of them, or I think 35 of them. Some number 35 to 50 of these poems you can read that are depressing.
Rabbi,
Yes.
you had mentioned that this is post-biblical, right? So
The celebration is post-biblical, although it does celebrate something that mourn something that happens in the Bible. But yes,
first of all, when did it originate? And could you contrast the provisions of the fasting and all of the other prohibitions here compared to the prohibitions that might be biblical in Yom Kippur?
now as to when it started, we don't know. We do know it's in the Talmud. So we know by the 5th century CE, 6th century, it's already done. There are references in Christian writings to Jews mourning on this time period in the 4th and I think 3rd centuries. So again, if you're somebody who's more traditional, you'll say we've had this day since the destruction of the first temple in the 5th century, 6th century. That we don't have proof of, but it is definitely in the Talmud. And it's definitely references to it. So we probably have been in some way having this type of mourning process since the 2nd or 3rd century CE, since the destruction of the Second Temple or years later. So it's a pretty old holiday. And it's also connected to other holidays because it's part of a grouping of holidays with some other fast days. So basically in the summer, you have a couple of fast days. You have the 10th of Tevet. That is when they started to siege the temple, the Babylonians. The 17th of Tammuz, when the Romans first got through the temple. And then the fast of Gedalia, which comes afterwards, which is when this Jewish leader who was a governor of Gedalia was assassinated. Fast of Gedalia is before it, yeah. So it's a build-up, but these 3 other holidays are only partial fast days. They're the ones you only fast. So you have a fast day just during daylight hours. We play another fast day during daylight hours, another fast day during daylight hours. Then you have a full fast day. And so Tisha B'Av has become a day since probably the 3rd, 4th, or 5th century, where you put all of these other terrible things that have happened from the Holocaust, expulsion from all these countries, particular massacres where lots of Jews have died. You put them on these days. And there have been other traditions through the years as to, what you do. But in Israel, this is a very important holiday because a lot of people do fast on this day in Israel. Maybe as many people fast for Yom Kippur, because obviously a lot of it is centered on the destruction of the temple. There are those who believe that Tisha B'Av is also going to be the date when the Messiah will be born. That's also a thought. So again,
Rabbi Flossie has a question.
yes, Flossie, I'm sorry.
That's okay, please. How much?
Because I'm doing my notes, I only have one screen on. So I don't see it.
No, that's okay. How much time elapsed from the destruction of the first temple to the second temple?
So the destruction of the first temple was in 586 BCE, and the destruction of the second was in 70 CE. So about 656 years. So so we had a temple. That temple existed from about the year 940 to the year 70, with only about a 70-year. So except for 70 years, we had a temple there. So we probably had the temple there for about 950 years.
Yeah, I was gonna ask a silly question.
No silly questions, or silly answers.
What if that's your Jewish birthday? Is it you just sit in mourning, and are you like bad luck because all your stuff, everything bad happens that day?
Well, that is a good question because it is a difficult day to have a birthday. However, there's also belief the Messiah is born on that day. So think about that. Not only that, if you're Jewish, the day is only, remember, Jewish day says, let's say I'm born on Tisha B'Av, the holiday ends that night. So I can still celebrate my birthday that night. Because remember, the Jewish day starts at night and ends at night. So, yeah, but if it is Tisha B'Av, you're not going to probably, you're very strict. You're not eating cake till way after sundown.
You observe your birthday on the Julian calendar? Or
Maybe you could do that.
Yeah, it wouldn't be every year. Because
Right. It could be like this, like if Tisha B'Av is on the Sabbath, it's moved to the next day, to Sunday. Maybe if your birthday is on Tisha B'Av, you move it to the next day. And that is unlike Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur can be on the Sabbath, but Yom Kippur cannot be on a Friday or a Sunday.
Right.
Because you can't have the Sabbath and then Yom Kippur in a row. It's the two major prohibitive days in a row. So if Yom Kippur is on a Sunday, they move it to Saturday, which is the opposite of Tisha B'Av. If Tisha B'Av is on Saturday, they move it to Sunday.
So in Israel, you say it is kind of observed as a major holiday then?
It's not a major holiday, but it is it is more. There is a lot of people mourn on this day.
Stores close and things of that
Yes,
nature?
stores do close on Tisha B'Av in Israel. A lot of them will. In fact, it is a national holiday. I don't think you're required to close, obviously, but if you're a kosher store, you probably do. Like if you want to get your kashrut stamp, you're gonna have to be closed on Tisha B'Av. But then again, and you're in Tel Aviv. A lot of of course, they don't all close in Tel Aviv. It's just. So now, let's talk about one thing before we get to the Reform movement's view of it. Tisha B'Av has a very close connection with Holocaust Remembrance Day. Obviously, there is, connections because the Holocaust Remembrance Day is a day of mourning. And of course, Tisha B'Av is a traditional day of mourning. But before we go to that, I'm going to read the Talmudic one of the Talmudic sections. Our rabbis taught all of the commandments associated with mourning apply to the 9th of Av. It is forbidden to eat, drink, anoint oneself, wear shoes, or have marital relations. Again, that is so funny, marital relations instead of just relations. It is forbidden to study the Torah, prophets, or writings, to learn Mishnah, Talmud, Midrash, Halacha, or Agadic sources. It is, however, permitted to study texts that he is not used to reading, or to learn Mishnah that he's not familiar with. He may study the Book of Lamentations, the Book of Job, and the sad parts of Jeremiah. School children do not attend school on that day, as the verse states, God's precepts are just, bringing joy to the heart. So these prohibitions I mentioned to you actually come directly from the Talmud. So they could be as early as the 3rd century and as late as the 6th century CE, because nobody knows exactly when anything. So it is, again, an old holiday if it's in the Talmud. And again, all of the same ideas of fasting on Yom Kippur are the same, except for you don't work traditionally on Yom Kippur and you can work on Tisha B'Av. So in Israel, it has become an interesting debate, or it had been, as to the Holocaust in Tisha B'Av, because in 1977, Menachem Begin, he wasn't prime minister yet, but he had just been elected prime minister, came to America and visited with the great Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. It's probably one of the most important rabbis of the last couple decades. And Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was very prominent and had a lot of pull, suggested that Yom HaShoah be put into Tisha B'Av. So instead of having a day just to memorialize the Holocaust, as had been done in Israel previously, to put Yom HaShoah within Tisha B'Av, as just to add it in. And so that was a very big debate as to whether we should combine Tisha B'Av and Yom HaShoah. Because obviously the tragedy of the Holocaust is one of the great tragedies, if not the greatest, in the Jewish history. Obviously, it was decided not to combine them. And one of the reasons was that there are still people who remember the Holocaust. There's still people who lived through the Holocaust. There's still people who lost their parents or their siblings or their children during the Holocaust, and they're still living. So that was one of the impetus for making sure they didn't combine them. However, that logic is only temporary, because obviously at some point in history there will be no Holocaust survivors. At some point in history there'll be nobody whose parents died in the Holocaust. That, of course, is going to take many more years, but we all know at some point in history there will be nobody who remembers the Holocaust. There'll be nobody who has first-person history or first-person connection. So that's the question. In 50 years or 100 years, will there be a conscious decision to combine Yom HaShoah with Tisha B'Av? Because you can remember the expulsion from Spain and the destruction of the temples and the Holocaust in one holiday. Obviously, that's not going to happen anytime soon, because the Holocaust is still within living memory for some people. But that may be something that happens in the future. So it was decided not to do it, but who knows what's going to happen. So it may disappear into the holiday. Now, how many of you have ever gone to a Tisha B'Av service? It's okay, good. It's basically you sit on stools. Some people go in sandals. Some people go barefoot. You don't have your belt on. You read Lamentations. You have a service. There's no celebration or food. You'll study maybe the book of Job. And again, it's meant to be somber. So why has this holiday become so controversial in the Reform movement? And maybe a little bit in the conservative movement. it has to do with the destruction of the two temples. And that's what poses the issue. I'm going to read from Mark Wachowski, who is a very prominent Reformed theologian, who is a professor at HUC in Cincinnati. The observance of the 9th day of Av poses some special problems for Reformed Jews. So I'll give you, in one synagogue, when I asked to have a Tisha B'Av service, they were fine with it. Another synagogue said, no, we're not doing that. The day is from Mark Wachowski. The day is one of fasting and mourning for the destruction of the first and second temples in Jerusalem. While other tragic events in Jewish history may have coincided with the 9th of Av, it is this temple's destruction which dominates the day's ritual and liturgy. Reformed theology has not generally looked upon the loss of the temple and the expulsion of people from Israel from its land as a catastrophe to be lamented by liberal Jews. In the words of the Pittsburgh Platform, the big platform for the Reform movement from the 19th century, we consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore expect neither return to Palestine nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron. Some Reformed prayer books ignore Tisha B'Av altogether. Others have gone so far as to transform the day into one of joy as well as sadness. For on the day when the temple was laid to waste and people were scattered across the face of earth, Israel accepted the religious mission to disseminate the knowledge of God to all mankind. Since some reformers regarded this as the essence of Israel's eternal religious mission, they saw the destruction of the temple and the sacrificial cult as a progressive and positive moment in our history. This point of view was never a unanimous one. Other Reformed thinkers emphasized that however much we feel at home in our Western lands, and however little we feel the need to pray for restoration of sacrificial worship, the tragedies and sufferings of Jewish history cannot be erased by the experience of but a few years of enlightenment and emancipation. So this holiday has become controversial because, one, it centers on the destruction of the temples. And when you center your mourning on the destruction of the temple, in some circles, what are you praying for? That the temples will be rebuilt
Yeah, rebuilt.
and will start the sacrificial cult again. And will end prayer and do sacrifice. And the Reform movement is not a very big proponent of sacrifices. And there's a belief that even before the temple was destroyed in the year 70, the sacrifices were already going out of vogue and we were doing more and more prayer. So we don't want to go back to the sacrifices. We want to continue what we're doing. Plus, the destruction of the second temple meant that Jews went out to the rest of the world and we expanded our horizons. And we realized that our religion could survive outside Israel, that we would not die off or assimilate. We realized that after the destruction of by the Babylonians, and after the destruction by the Romans. So because of this, we will see in Reform prayer books, sometimes Tisha B'Av is not even mentioned. And that is, now others would say, however, we still should remember that even though we don't want the sacrificial cult, people died during the destruction of the temples. Houses were destroyed, people were exiled, they became refugees. So we should honor their memory as well. So it is okay to have Tisha B'Av ceremonies. And this is the debate that continues in the Reform movement, not necessarily the other ones. So there are a couple debates which we'll see. One is Yom HaShoah, having a specific holiday to one terrible moment in our history, comparing it to Tisha B'Av, in which we have a whole bunch of terrible moments put in one. Any thoughts or questions?
Why did they think the Messiah is supposed to come on that day?
Not come, be born on that day. That is a good question.
Sorry. Yeah.
I imagine because of the destruction of the temple, it is, I'll have to look that up. Why? I forgot the passage that links it. But again, the destruction of the temple is the day that the cult ends. So I guess it is also the day where redemption will begin. Some sort of thought like that. But that's a really good question.
Rabbi, is it up then to the individual Reform congregation whether they will celebrate it or not?
Exactly. And again, it's up to individuals whether you're going to fast or not. So, you know, the percentage of people who fast for Tisha B'Av in the more liberal world is very small in comparison to those who fast for Yom Kippur. Obviously, Yom Kippur is a much more famous holiday, and also it's a more important one. It's a Torah holiday. Karen.
If you mentioned this, I'm sorry, I just been thinking. I know it's Reform congregations that will name themselves temple, whereas Orthodox and conservative, and I'm not sure about Reconstructionists, won't use that because they feel the only temple was the temples in, well, the temple in Jerusalem. But did that come out of that same?
That's it's exactly right. It connects to it. Although that is changing, a lot of Reform synagogues are temple, they've changed it to congregation.
Yes.
But
yeah.
In Savannah, for instance, if you said you're going to temple, you're going to Mikveh Israel. If you're saying you're going to synagogue, you're going to the AA, conservative. If you say you're going to the shul, you're going to BBJ, the Orthodox. Michael.
I want to go back to one of the first things you said about fasting, and because it struck me as very interesting. You know, a fast being 25 hours, yes, but at the same time, every Reform synagogue that or temple that I've gone to, Nila ends well before sundown. And frequently, as you leave, somebody gives you a piece of challah or some juice. So you're not really fasting 25 hours. And I guess, you know, what is the Reform rationale for that?
Well, I think the idea is you fast for basically about 24 hours. Because if you start services at 6 and you end it at 6 the next day, it's about 24, 25 hours. It may not be the exact amount because you're probably starting services before it really begins. Like here, if we start services at 6, you know, really Rosh Hashanah probably doesn't start till 7. So you're actually still getting in 24 hours. But also Reform movement is not a halachic movement. It means you don't have to follow all of the rules. It's more the meaning behind the rules. But that's an excellent question.
That's a really good answer.
But yes, you would, if you go to, so you would wait in other places, you would wait till there's 3 stars or a certain amount of time afterwards. And you also start early just to make sure, you know, you don't start fasting exactly the moment Yom Kippur starts. You start ahead of time.
But Kol Nidre starts before sundown traditionally.
Right. Yeah, so, exactly. You know. Larry.
Yeah, just by coincidence, this morning I opened the email, and one of the things that I got was sort of an invitation from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, where they're having a sort of a retreat or a learning session in the Berkshires, the end of July. And the first thing they mentioned is Tisha B'Av.
And that is a really good point.
And it's a whole weekend of I guess, activities and celebration, and you go up to Tanglewood as well and visit the Clark Institute there. You know, they're throwing all of that in, and you know, it's prayer and study, and it's but Tisha B'Av is prominently mentioned as one of the features of that. So I'm just based on what Flossie had asked about, is there a Reform position that kind of, even though it's let's say not a major holiday, it emphasizes, it seems like that they're taking a position here coming out of HUCJIR.
And that is an excellent point. So what you're seeing is changes, evolution. The Reform movement was really not one that celebrated Tisha B'Av for a very long time. The late 19th century for 70, 80, 90 years of the 20th century. However, the reform movement has evolved to the point that it's a little bit more traditional now than it used to be. And whereas the reform movement used to say, we're just not going to do something, it's now more like, we're going to still do it. We may just change the meaning behind it. Like, we're still going to honor those who died during Tisha B'Av, but we're not going to mourn the loss of temples to the point of we want to renovate and start it again. The reform movement is not very big on messianic individuals. The reform movement is more about messianic groups. Like, we as a group can help change the world, as opposed to we're waiting for an individual to do it. So that's another reason Tisha B'Av you'll not have to hear the reform movement talk about the birth of the Messiah on this day. But it's always, and different synagogues do it different ways. There's still synagogues today that will not even touch Tisha B'Av, and there's others that will do a big weekend retreat for it. But are they going to fast? Well, I don't know. So again, it's how you look at it. You know, it's like anything else. You can cut something away, or you can change the meaning of it and
Yeah,
keep it.
Next Wednesday, they're having an informational session. The session that they're going to is going to be a 4-day session. I understand the end of July. But if you're interested in information, and I signed up for it, is on June 14th at, I think it's Wednesday at 12 o'clock. They're having a virtual information center from the HUCJIR. Some of you may have gotten the,
Yeah, you can actually next week, because that'll be right after you finish class, just
yeah,
put that in the chats and the link in the chat section for anybody who's interested,
thank you.
because it'll be right after the class.
And
But
what,
I'm sorry, Genevieve and then Jane.
oh, sorry. I am curious, it might be a side discussion, but what reform does feel about the whole idea of Messiah returning?
There's not one position, but the reform, the belief in the Messiah in the modern world has lessened quite a bit, because we're very empowered. The reform movement is much more proactive. Instead of waiting, we do it ourselves. We're not waiting for a Messiah to come to save us. We're not waiting to be saved. Whenever we've waited to be saved, it has not worked out well. So when anybody waits to be saved, it doesn't work out well. You got the whole story about the guy on the roof. We all know that story.
Yep.
And everybody know that story?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you wait and you're not proactive, nothing's going to happen. So the reform movement is more about, if we want a messianic era, then we've got to do it ourselves. The world is going to have to work together. We can't just sit back and let some character come and do it. So the Messiah as a person is not a big, is not stressed in the reform movement, not as much probably the conservative movement either. But remember, even so, the Messiah is nothing more than a regular guy. It's the only thing we read about the Messiah is that he'll be born on Tisha B'Av and he's a descendant of King David. He's not a superhero.
And do you know what the Kabbalist view of it is?
Well, the Kabbalah, of course, and other places are very, very much supportive of the idea of the Messiah. But again, and a lot of them, the Messiah becomes bigger when you're living in areas where you're suffering. So in some worlds, the Messiah is a major factor in their belief system in Judaism. In others, he is not. Jane, that's a good question.
When my kids were growing up, we were conservative. And they went to, one of them went. After that, the other two said, no, we don't want to. But she went to Camp Ramah. And I was surprised. She said to me, oh, we celebrated, not use the word we mourned, we celebrated. We celebrated Tu B'Shvat. Tisha B'Av. And I said, well, how did you do it? And she said, oh, it was like any other day, but we didn't go swimming. So I have no idea what really happens because I know it's acknowledged, let's put it that way, but it's not a fast day.
Yeah, I mean, whether you, for some people, you go and relax with the family. Again, it's not going to be a fast day for kids. The staff, whether the staff was fasting or not, that may be different. But again, you're not going to force people to fast because at camp, because that would be, illegal. But yeah, Ramah, I'm sure does something in Tisha B'Av. I'm sure staff members are invited to fast if they want, but it's also very hard when you're at camp all day in the heat.
Right.
Arlene. Oh, no, Arlene, sorry, Flossie.
Flossie.
With you saying the reform movement with being proactive, is that part, if we go back to the Holocaust, that instead of waiting for God or the Mashiach to come and help us, that we had to have resistance groups and different things, that we had to be proactive?
That's a great question. Now, what is interesting is that belief in the reform movement predates the Holocaust. So we're already in the 19th century for this. The Holocaust really just added to it, but the reform movement was already at the point where the Messiah had been taken out of the prayer books way before the Holocaust.
Really?
Yeah. So the Holocaust probably just added to it a bit. But if you look at the prayer books that were used, the Union prayer book, they took out everything about the Messiah. How do you know? Well, they take out stuff about Jerusalem, and especially about David. Because anytime you see David in the prayer book, it is about the Messiah. Usually when you see Jerusalem in the prayer book, it's about the Messiah. Now, when it comes to Tisha B'Av, we also have the added change in that we are not longing to return to Jerusalem as a people because we're there. Jews can go, the country is a Jewish country. Any Jewish person can go to Jerusalem and can go up to the wall. So we are not seeking a return to Jerusalem literally anymore, because all you need to go to Jerusalem is buy a ticket. Or if you live there, get on a train or a bus. So it's real easy now. So if you take it from the literal translation of return to Jerusalem, it's done. Finish that puppy. However, we also know that Jerusalem in prayer and often in Jewish law does not mean a literal return to Jerusalem like we go ourselves. When they say Jerusalem, they mean a rebuilding of the temple, and the Messiah comes going to Jerusalem, and we go there and the world comes back under perfection. That is, kind of like the end days. So if you take it literally, people in Israel can just say, hey, we're doing what we're supposed to do. I'm going to Jerusalem, Tisha B'Av, baby. However, others would say, no, it's not the literal translation of going to Jerusalem. It means something more ethereal than that. So that's I'm sorry, Larry?
On your service, is it this Saturday is Tisha B'Av? Or
No, Tisha B'Av's not till July.
Oh, till
I was just thinking about, we haven't talked about the holidays. Yeah.
Well, do you do any special service? Or do you
We do
plan-
not here. It might be something to think about, though. I don't even know if we mentioned it. This year it's on Wednesday,
Is there a special
Wednesday to
Torah
Thursday,
portion?
the 26th.
Is there a special Torah portion for it? You said Book of Lamentations, but
You read the Book of Lamentations. You don't need to read a Torah portion unless it's on like a Saturday, Tuesday, or Thursday.
I like the celebration idea.
Yeah.
Celebrate means different things to different people, I think,
Right.
also,
But yeah, I'm sorry. You'll read from the Torah. You'll read Exodus. There's passages in Exodus you will read on that day. Sorry, I forgot.
Genevieve said she had an idea.
What's your idea? My son always says that.
Oh, no, I just said celebration is a good idea.
Yeah, celebration now. For some, celebration would be called heretical because you're not supposed to celebrate, you're supposed to mourn. But others look at the destruction of the temple and say, listen, it's terrible that people were killed, but it was a needed change. We needed to get away from this sacrificial cult and get out in the world and start praying and start doing. And that the sacrificial cult was actually a negative, not a positive.
Well, even in life in general, when you don't want to move forward, sometimes God pushes you that way, whether you like it or not.
And that is how the Reform movement kind of looks at it. It was God's will, sort of, that we got over this, that eventually we had to get over it. And that's a good analysis. Flossie.
It's like kicking your kids out at 18. It's like, okay, it's time. The security is here, and I know it's comfy, but it's time to go explore.
Right, or kicking them out at 5 and 3.
Yeah,
Right, I mean, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
you're stuck.
We were
Flossie.
praying before. as
Would you say-
far
Would you
as
say one more time?
sacrificing. Is it just, it became predominant then?
I lost what you said at the beginning. Would you mind repeating
I
yourself?
said, when you're
Sorry.
saying how prayer came in, we
Mhm.
were praying before. Was it simultaneously with sacrificing?
Yes, we were for a century and a half or 2.5 centuries or so. Prayer was already around. Some say even farther. So you had different groups at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. There were groups that wanted to get rid of it already, saying we're praying, we're studying, we don't need this. So basically there was a competition for the soul and future of Judaism. On one side were the priests who wanted the sacrificial cult, as we had been doing for over 1,000 years. There was another group that said we want to study, we want to pray, and we want to do good deeds. Although both sides did good deeds. And they were competing, but the priests had said that the only place you can do sacrifice is at the temple in Jerusalem. That had been policy for centuries. You can only sacrifice in one place, the temple in Jerusalem. So what happened? The temple in Jerusalem is destroyed, and they've been saying for centuries that's the only place you can sacrifice. And so their power faded away fairly quickly. And this other group who said, let's study and pray, won out. And that's what we do to this day, 2,000 years later.
Well, it was an economic, decision for the
It was that
priests.
as well.
I mean, that they lived on sacrifice.
And that very much, but again, you have to remember, there were a lot of priests. There's the higher priests, the Cohens, the lower priests, the Levites. Only a small percentage were actually working at the temple.
At the temple.
Others were doing other things, bring other places. So, the elite of the elite or whoever was in power got to work at the temple. So these debates we talk about continue to this day as how much stress we should have on the Messiah, how much we should have on ourselves. What do we do for a holiday that is a holiday of mourning? What do we do for Yom HaShoah, which is another Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is another, so we now added a whole nother day of mourning. We had a lot of days of mourning, and then we added another one even sadder than the rest. What do we do about Tisha B'Av mourning not being in Jerusalem when we're in Jerusalem? And, when we were empowered? What do we do about a messianic character when you don't believe in the Messiah? Or you do believe in the Messiah? So it's a day of conundrums. It's the destruction of the temple, but the Messiah is supposed to be born. Larry.
Yeah, you had mentioned God's will, which I know we could talk about, endlessly. And I know it seems like a lot of the arguments that you hear out of the Orthodox are it's God's will. And it seemed like, God's will was because the Jewish people were doing something wrong and that was a punishment for them. Yet the Holocaust, at least just think the Rabbi Schneerson, he never really thought that, I think. There never was. So I think there was sort of a change in even philosophy, even in the Orthodox, that, God's will, that they were willing, that they were taking a different spin on it, if you will, that it was God's will to punish the Jewish people for these events. Destroying the temple was one of the things, Noah's Ark, the flood was another thing, but the Holocaust seems to have been totally different as far as at least in that, in trying to explain, that, no, that's not God's will to destroy them that way.
Right, and that is a good point. The destruction of the temple, some would say, well, Jews were not doing what they were supposed to do. Some people say that for the Holocaust already. Some people say it was all those Jews who were not following halakha. But it's really so recent to be able to say stuff like that is so hurtful. There was a Holocaust because you didn't keep kosher. There was a Holocaust because you travel on Shabbat. So you already have people who say this, but again, the Holocaust is still in living memory, so it can be very hurtful. But in 200 years, if you say the Holocaust happened because Jews were not doing what they were supposed to, you're not going to be insulting anybody who was there. So today it's so fresh in our memories, that is a terrible insult. You could say it to somebody who's living or say it to their parents about their parents. But in 200 years, it'll be like talking about the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was a terrible time in our history, but it was, 500 years ago. And as terrible it was 500 years ago, and there's nobody who remembers it. Nobody feels the Spanish Inquisition like we feel the Holocaust. But in 500 years from now, the Holocaust will probably be looked at like the Spanish Inquisition, a horrible time in our history, but it happened 500 years ago.
I'm going to disagree with that.
Or maybe not.
Oh,
It could be.
but because, the phrase "never forget," I think is something that's embodied into every segment of Judaism, and I think that the idea of the Holocaust is something that is going to be perpetuated and remembered to try to make ourselves aware of danger to Jews. So I think that 500 years from now, it'll be treated a lot differently than we treat, any previous, catastrophe. I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong.
One very alarming thing. I just got the Jewish newspaper here from the Ocean County, and just recently the minister from Israel of Holocaust and what is it called? Anti-Semitic affairs was dismissed. And I don't know whether or not you've read that, but she had quite a resume of, deeds that she had done there, and she was dismissed by the government. And apparently, she wrote a letter, which is in the Jewish News, which if I could find it, I'll try and copy it.
What'd she say?
Well, basically, it was,
Okay.
She was still very supportive of Israel, very supportive of all of the things that Israel stands for, or she felt it stands for, but all of the undemocratic things that are going on now in Israel with this very, what she calls anti-democratic government. She says she can't see how, her position. Of course, it was a defense of her position and a defense of the things that she had done, which were nonpartisan, even though she had spoken out against, many of the things that this new government in Israel had instituted. So there is this kind of I hate to say it, this anti-democratic movement, which is basically, so strong now that it is destroying, it seems like, some of the the things that even anti-Holocaust, or even at the expense of anti-Semitism, having their ambassador or their minister for anti-Semitism dismissed just for political grounds. I mean, it just if everything she says is true, and this is her side of the story, but we can look her up and see. I'm sure if you look it up, you Google it, you get a lot more information about it.
Yeah, well, she's not the only one. I mean, a lot of people are speaking up now against what's going on in Israel.
She's a very high official that has been
Rabbi?
dismissed. Yeah.
Rabbi,
Flossie.
with your going and saying how some people are feeling because we drove on Shabbat or didn't keep kosher, that was an excuse for the Holocaust and all. You could also look the destruction of the first temple and second temple, that people didn't keep kosher, not everyone did, that people went and maybe worked on Shabbat, that you could bring that argument in too. I don't believe in it, but
Yeah, and that argument is used. I mean, there's certain people that use that argument that the reason all these things happen is people were not following the rules. But you could also say the other side, the Holocaust happened because, people looked at people who were different and said, you guys look so different from us. I mean, you can always make that excuse that God's will for anything good or bad. So when you use it in that way, as a hurtful way, that's really problematic.
That's why the book of Job is always so interesting, because here apparently is a guy that followed all the rules. And it's just
Right.
that God had with whoever it is, the devil or somebody that, yeah, I can change him, so it really is a tremendous departure in the whole thought process, I think, of, God's will versus just a God who is not all there or something. Or you can question. It just is a very complicated.
100%, 100%. Yeah, again, that's why, Tisha B'Av is a different type of holiday. And before we go, I wanted to see we hadn't discussed if we wanted to have a series or what we wanted to study next week, or we want to do or did we just want to do it individual sessions again? Or did you guys have anything you thought you might want to study the next couple weeks?
I don't know if it's actually a whole class, but I did have a side question. And maybe it is a whole class. There seems to be a lot of conversation around this Deuteronomy, and I don't know the numbers, but it's the passage about men shouldn't wear women's clothing, and it seems to be a conversation now because of Pride Month.
We could do. I think this good one is homosexuality in Judaism.
Okay.
Let's do that next week.
Okay.
It's good suggestion.
Yeah.
I found today very thoughtful. I didn't really know, I didn't remember much about Tisha B'Av, and I think this was very, very enlightening.
Well, thanks.
I'm thinking of this whole idea of, was it our fault the Holocaust happened? That's really giving Hitler and his cronies
a way out.
a way out. Thank you. Yes. And I just observed Yom HaShoah in Munich, Germany. We went to services and went to a Yom HaShoah service. And even though I don't understand much German, although my husband does, there was a woman there she was the speaker and telling her story, and just words I picked up and looking at her face. And I'm sitting there thinking, how ironic, sitting in this city where the Nazis really got their start, and we're observing Yom HaShoah, and something I'll never forget about that evening. So he doesn't get a free ride, way out.
It's an excellent point.
I'd just like to mention one thing that we're going to this weekend here in New Jersey is we're having, as a part of the 75th anniversary of Israel Independence Day, they're having the Israeli Scouts.
Oh, it's awesome.
I don't know if we had them in Mikveh Israel, but
we used to get them every year here at the JA.
They're touring all of New Jersey, and I guess the Northeast.
There's several groups of them that tour around.
Oh,
They have different regional sections where they tour.
It might be something to look into, because apparently they haven't been here for several years because of COVID, and the Shalom Club is sponsoring our clubhouse this Saturday night.
They're going to be there this Saturday night?
Yeah, this Saturday night. You're all welcome. Come on up here.
I actually would love to see them. I used to remember at camp, but I can't this Saturday. I've got two things going on.
Many of the people are sponsoring them, so the residents here, and they're putting up. We came too late to sponsor anybody, but they're having like dinner with them, and they're sleeping.
They're so much fun, and they're so cute.
It might be a terrific event for us in Israel.
Yeah, would you send me the information? We'll see if we can get that out, and maybe
I don't know much about it, but I'll ask. I know who the president is of Shalom,
okay.
And I'll see how he made the contact with them.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah.
thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, guys.
So much. Thank you.
I will see you next week, or some of you maybe tonight. For Shabbat this weekend, we have a regular Friday night service, and then we're going to celebrate Joni Dane Kellogg and Larry Dane Kellogg's 50th anniversary on Saturday. So it'll be nice.
Nice.
Stay safe, guys.